Rachel, a single mom, bought a crumbling hotel for her daughter, never expecting its biggest secret would be revealed by a stray German shepherd. The dog led her to a sealed penthouse untouched for 40 years. Inside lay stolen treasures worth over $200 million and a history begging for justice. This discovery would change not just her life, but the lives of families across the world. If stories of courage move, you don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. The courthouse smelled of dust and rain-soaked coats that morning. Rachel Miller sat in the back row, her hands wrapped around a battered leather wallet that had seen better days. Inside it was everything she had scraped together 4 years of double shifts at the diner cleaning houses, on weekends selling her mother's wedding ring when the heating bill had nearly buried them last winter. $4,700, give or take a few crumpled bills. She could feel the weight of it pressing against her palms, as if it were more than just money, as if it carried her entire life, her daughter's future, the fragile thread of hope she had dared to spin in the quiet of sleepless nights. The auctioneer's voice rang sharp against the marble walls. Next item on the docket, the old Harborview Hotel. Starting bid $5,000. The name alone pulled at Rachel. Harborview. She had walked past that boarded-up building 1,000 times, its once grand windows blackened with dust vines curling up its stone facade. People said it was cursed that no one had managed to keep it open since the 70s. But when Rachel looked at it, she didn't see a ruin. She saw walls thick enough to hold back the cold, a roof that could keep out the rain rooms that could be turned into small apartments where single mothers like her wouldn't have to beg landlords for another week's grace. A home. Not just for her, maybe, but for others, too. The silence in the room stretched. Nobody raised a paddle. The locals knew better. Harborview wasn't a prize, it was a burden. Rachel's chest tightened. This was it. The chance she'd dreamed of was slipping through her fingers because she was $200 short. $4,800. She blurted, her voice trembling but firm. A murmur rippled through the room. The auctioneer frowned. "Ma'am, the minimum bid is $5,000. "That's all I have," Rachel said. She straightened her back, even though her knees wanted to give out. "Every cent." People turned to stare at her, some pitying, some amused. A man in the second row shook his head, as if she were reckless, a fool chasing ruins. The auctioneer hesitated, looked at the city clerk. The clerk shrugged. The truth was, the city didn't want Harborview. It had been a liability for decades. If someone was desperate enough to take it, why not going once, going twice? Sold for $4,800. Rachel's breath left her like a wave crashing against rock. She gripped the wallet so tightly her knuckles blanched. She had just bought a hotel. Her hotel. When she signed the papers, the pen shook in her hand. She imagined Lily's face, her daughter's small, sharp eyes that carried too much understanding for a 9-year-old. She pictured telling her tonight that they finally had a place of their own, that they would no longer fall asleep to the thumping bass from the liquor store downstairs, or wake to cigarette smoke creeping under the apartment door. She forced herself to stand tall as she walked past the other bidders, who eyed her with the detached sympathy people reserve for lost causes. But Rachel wasn't a lost cause. She wouldn't be. Not if she could help it. Outside, the rain had turned the courthouse steps slick. She pulled her coat tight, the chill biting into her bones, but it didn't matter. In her hand was a folded deed that felt heavier than gold. She closed her eyes for a moment, whispering to herself, "We've got a chance now, Lil. Just wait." The words almost broke her, because she knew what they cost every hour she hadn't been home to tuck her daughter in, every birthday she'd tried to stretch, with dollar store balloons, every sacrifice of warmth, comfort, dignity. All of it condensed into this single gamble. She lifted her chin and walked toward the bus stop, the gray outline of Harborview rising in the distance through the mist, like a battered giant daring her to try. That night, Rachel sat across from Lily at the small kitchen table in their apartment above the liquor store. The light flickered overhead, buzzing with fatigue. Lily poked at her macaroni and cheese, her braids falling over her shoulders. "Why are you smiling, Mom?" she asked, squinting. Rachel realized she was. She leaned across the table, reached for her daughter's hand. "Because, sweetheart, tomorrow we're going to see our new home." Lily blinked, confused. "We're moving." Rachel nodded. "We're moving." She didn't say the word hotel, not yet. It would sound too impossible. She wanted Lily to see it first, to believe it with her own eyes. The morning after the courthouse, Rachel and Lily stood before the Harborview Hotel. The building looked even bigger, up close its tall stone walls streaked with rain vines twisting around the fire escapes like green ropes pulling it back into the earth. Rachel tightened her grip on her daughter's hand. "Don't be scared," she whispered. "It just needs a little love." Lily tilted her head, skeptical but trusting. They pushed the heavy front door open, and the hinges groaned as if waking from a long sleep. Inside, dust hung in the air motes, swirling in the sunlight that streamed through broken windows. The chandelier still clung stubbornly to the ceiling, tilted like it had given up halfway. Their footsteps echoed across the marble floor, each sound swallowed by silence that felt too thick for comfort. Rachel tried to imagine it clean alive again with voices, laughter, light. But the reality was years of grime and neglect and a smell of damp wood and rust that seeped into her clothes. She was determined not to let Lily see the weight of doubt pressing on her chest. "See, it's beautiful," she said. Lily's nose wrinkled, but she nodded. "It smells funny," she whispered. Rachel laughed softly. "We'll fix that." They set down their backpacks near the front desk, ready for a long day of cleaning. Rachel had bought a broom, a bucket rags, even a flashlight for the darker corners. She rolled up her sleeves and tried to summon the same courage that had carried her through the auction. Then came the sound that froze them both, a shuffle low and deliberate from somewhere beyond the grand staircase. Rachel stiffened her eyes, darting toward the shadows. "Stay behind me," she murmured, her hand instinctively reaching to shield Lily. The sound grew closer, nails clicking faintly against the stone floor. Then a shape emerged. A dog. Not just any dog, but a German shepherd. Its frame lean and gaunt, ribs faintly visible beneath a coat that might once have been glossy. Its ears pricked, tail lowered, but steady amber eyes fixed on them, with a watchfulness that felt unsettlingly human. Lily gasped softly, clutching Rachel's arm. "Mom, he's huge." Rachel held her breath. The dog didn't growl, didn't advance. It stood a few yards away, head slightly tilted, studying them as though weighing what they were. "Hey, boy," Rachel said carefully, her voice low and calm. "It's okay. We're not here to hurt you." The shepherd blinked slowly, then took a single step forward, nails scraping faintly. Rachel noticed the way it moved, cautious but controlled, every motion precise. This wasn't a stray born on the street. This was a dog that had been trained once, though clearly abandoned long enough to grow thin and wary. "Mom, he's looking right at us," Lily whispered. Rachel crouched slightly, extending a hand. "It's okay," she repeated. The dog didn't approach, but it didn't retreat either. Instead, after a moment of silence, it turned, padded toward the staircase, then paused to look back at them. Its eyes met Rachel's again, insistent. "Is he showing us something?" Lily asked. Rachel frowned, uneasy. "Dogs don't do that," she murmured, though her gut twisted because she wasn't sure she believed herself. The shepherd moved again, climbing halfway up the staircase, then pausing, staring until they followed. Rachel hesitated, torn between caution and curiosity, but Lily tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, maybe he wants us to see." Together they ascended their footsteps, creaking on the worn steps. The dog waited patiently at the landing, then padded down a side corridor Rachel hadn't noticed before. It led to a section of wall boarded up with old planks. The dog sat squarely before it, head lifted, as if presenting proof. Rachel's pulse quickened. "What is this?" she muttered. The planks looked hastily nailed years ago. She pressed a hand against them, felt the brittle wood give slightly under her palm. Lily crouched to peer closer. Why would someone block a hallway? Rachel didn't answer. She was staring at the shepherd who hadn't moved, who watched her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered. The dog shifted, nudging its nose against the lowest board, then sat again, waiting. Rachel's throat went dry. She felt the same surge of unease she had in the courthouse, the sharp awareness that choices like this could change everything. She glanced at Lily, who was biting her lip eyes wide with questions she didn't dare ask. Maybe it's nothing Rachel said, but the words rang hollow. The shepherd lowered itself to the ground, paws outstretched, still watching. It wasn't leaving. Rachel's stomach churned. She had come here to build a life, not to chase mysteries hidden behind broken walls. Yet something about the dog's persistence gnawed at her, pulling her closer to the boarded entrance. She set her jaw, her heart pounding in her chest, and pressed harder against the wood. Rachel pressed harder against the planks, feeling the brittle wood splinter beneath her hand. The German shepherd's eyes followed every move, ears pricked, body tense with a strange kind of urgency. Lily shifted nervously at her mother's side, hugging her arms against her chest. "Mom, why is he acting like this?" Rachel shook her head slowly, her voice low. "I don't know, baby, but it's like he wants us to look." She grabbed the edge of one board, tugged, and it groaned under the pressure. Dust exploded into the air, stinging her throat, and she coughed hard. Lily reached out to steady her, her small fingers wrapping around Rachel's wrist. The shepherd barked once, sharp and commanding, startling them both. Then he pawed again at the lowest board nails, scraping insistently as though he understood exactly what needed to be done. Rachel exhaled, steeling herself. She pulled harder, the board snapping at last with a jagged crack. It clattered to the floor, revealing darkness behind. Lily's eyes widened. "Mom, there's something back there." Rachel nodded, adrenaline coursing through her veins. One by one she pried off the remaining boards, her hands aching nails, bending splinters embedding themselves into her skin. The shepherd barked each time a board fell, pacing back and forth, impatient for her to finish. At last the crude barricade gave way, and before them stretched a narrow hallway coated in shadows, dust thick on the floor, but otherwise untouched. The air that escaped was stale, heavy with years of silence. Rachel's breath caught. "This shouldn't be here," she murmured. She lifted her flashlight, and the beam cut through the gloom, illuminating cracked plaster walls that seemed frozen in time. Lily clung to her sleeve, whispering, "It looks like no one's been in here forever." The shepherd pushed past them, trotting into the hallway with steady steps, tail low, shoulders taut with intent. He glanced back, once a silent command to follow. Rachel hesitated, but her feet carried her forward anyway. The hallway twisted, and then they saw it. A staircase, narrow and steep, rising into the dark above. It didn't appear on any of the building's blueprints Rachel had seen online, nor in the city's faded records. The wood creaked faintly, as if remembering footsteps long gone. Lily squeezed her mother's hand tighter. "Where does it go?" Rachel swallowed her voice, hushed. "I think... up." She shone the flashlight higher. The staircase ended in a heavy steel door, its paint long since peeled away to reveal dull, gray metal streaked with rust. Chains wrapped thick around the handles fused together with age locks, corroded but still intact. The sight made Rachel's stomach twist. Someone had not only wanted this floor sealed, but wanted it sealed forever. She raised her hand to touch the cold steel, the flashlight beam trembling in her grip. 40 years, she whispered half to herself. Maybe more. The shepherd barked sharply, the sound ricocheting against the walls. He stood, rigid eyes fixed on the chained door, every muscle coiled like a spring. Then he barked again, louder, this time echoing up the stairwell, his tail stiff body pressing forward. Rachel flinched. "Stop it," she muttered, though her own nerves were fraying. Lily tugged her sleeve. "Mom, he wants us to open it." Rachel glanced down at her daughter, saw the mix of fear and curiosity on her face. Her heart pounded. "It's locked, honey. Look at it. Those chains. They've been here for decades." But the dog wouldn't stop. His barking grew insistent, his body pressed closer to the door as if he could break through himself. The sound reverberated through Rachel's bones, a demand she couldn't ignore. Her pulse raced, her palms damp. She stared at the chains, imagining what could be hidden so carefully, why someone would go to such lengths. Her rational mind screamed that she had enough to worry about patching roofs, fixing plumbing, making the hotel livable. But another voice whispered back, what if the dog was right? What if something here mattered more than the dust and decay? Lily's eyes shone wide in the flashlight's glow. "Please, Mom, just try." Rachel bit her lip, scanned the room. She spotted a rusted crowbar leaning in the corner of the stairwell left behind by some long-forgotten worker. She picked it up, the weight solid in her hands, and set the tip against the corroded lock. The shepherd barked once more, then fell silent, as if waiting. Rachel drew a deep breath, her muscles trembling, and pressed down hard. The metal screeched, protesting, sparks of rust flaking into the air. Her arms ached, but she pushed again, harder. The lock groaned, bending under the force, the chain rattling like bones disturbed after years of rest. Lily held her breath, clutching the flashlight tighter. Rachel's shoulders burned, her teeth clenched, the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. The shepherd paced behind her, growling low, vibrating with urgency. Then came a sharp crack, the lock snapping at last, the sound exploding like a gunshot in the silence. The chain sagged loose, still draped across the handles but no longer binding them shut. Rachel froze, her chest heaving. She stared at the heavy door, now only a push away, and every nerve in her body screamed with the possibility of what might lie beyond. Rachel stood frozen before the door, the broken lock dangling from the chain like a dead weight. Her chest rose and fell quickly as the German shepherd pressed its body against the steel nails, clicking impatiently, tail stiff with purpose. Lily squeezed Rachel's arm, her small voice trembling. "Mom, what if there's something scary inside?" Rachel looked down at her daughter's wide eyes, saw fear and anticipation mingling there, and felt her own pulse racing faster. "We'll find out together," she whispered, even though her stomach churned with doubt. With one last breath, she pressed her palm against the cold handle and shoved. The hinges screamed a metallic groan echoing through the stairwell as the heavy door inched open. A draft swept past them, but it was not the stench of rot or mold she expected. It was cool, almost fresh, tinged with the faint mechanical hum of air circulation. The shepherd slipped inside, first his paws silent against the floor, nose lifted as he sniffed with precision. Rachel lifted the flashlight higher, but her jaw slackened before she could take more than a step. The beam illuminated a wide hallway, lined with polished wood paneling that shone faintly dustless, untouched. Carpets stretched beneath their feet, vibrant with patterns not frayed or discolored, but preserved as if laid down yesterday. Rachel's heart skipped. This couldn't be real. She stepped further, the sound of her footsteps muffled against the fibers. Lily gasped, tugging her sleeve. "Mom, it's like no one ever left." Rachel swept the light across the hallway, noticing vents built into the ceiling, small machines humming quietly in the corners. Air filtration systems, dehumidifiers, even subtle temperature controls, all still running after decades. Her mind spun at the thought of someone setting this up, maintaining it long after the world outside had forgotten this floor. The hallway ended in tall double doors of dark oak, their handles polished and gleaming. The shepherd barked, once urgent but steady, and pushed his nose against the crack. Rachel reached for the handle, her hand trembling as she turned it. The door swung inward with a weighty sigh, and the flashlight beam spilled into a vast room. Her breath caught in her throat. The penthouse stretched before them, enormous walls, high and arched with plaster still pristine, the ceiling painted with faded murals that had not crumbled. Golden light from antique lamps flickered faintly, powered by some hidden source. The air was cool, dry, without a trace of decay. But it was the walls that stole Rachel's breath completely. Paintings, dozens of them, framed in gilded wood canvases alive with color brushstrokes shimmering even under the modest glow. Her eyes caught names inscribed on plaques beneath them. Gainsborough, Turner, Rembrandt. Artists she remembered from the art books she once skimmed during college nights before Lily was born, when dreams of another life still felt possible. She stepped closer, her flashlight trembling across the surface of a pastoral landscape, the greens and blues so vivid it felt as if the paint had only just dried. They can't be real," she murmured, her throat tight. Lily crept to her side, her small hand brushing Rachel's. "They look real," she whispered in awe. The shepherd padded across the room with calm familiarity, weaving between velvet chairs and polished tables that gleamed as though polished yesterday. In the adjoining dining area, Rachel caught her breath again. Glass display cases lined the walls, each lit by delicate bulbs that had somehow never burned out. Inside rested sculptures, bronze figures with rippling muscles, marble busts with serene expressions, artifacts whose details bore the unmistakable touch of centuries past. A Roman coin collection gleamed faintly under glass. Porcelain vases painted with scenes of another world stood perfectly intact. Rachel sank into one of the velvet chairs, her knees weak, her body overwhelmed by the sheer impossibility before her. Her flashlight lowered to her lap as her eyes darted across the room, trying to make sense of it. "Mom, this is worth a lot, isn't it?" Lily asked softly. Rachel swallowed words, failing her. "It's worth everything," she finally breathed. Her mind raced through possibilities, calculations she had no experience making. Each piece could pay off debts, buy them a home fund, Lily's education, maybe even change their lives completely. Yet beneath the awe lay a tremor of dread. Who had locked this away? Why keep treasures hidden instead of showing them to the world? And why had the shepherd led them here, as if guarding it until the right moment? She rose slowly, the flashlight beam steady, now tracing the length of the penthouse. On the far wall, near an ornate fireplace carved with intricate lions, a desk stood waiting its surface, polished, a single envelope resting in the center. Rachel felt her pulse quicken again, her body pulled forward by invisible threads. She reached the desk, her fingers brushing the edge of the envelope, her name not written, only a simple phrase, "To the one who dares to open." She stared, her hand trembling as she picked it up. The shepherd settled at her feet, his head bowed, but his eyes locked on her, waiting as though he knew what came next. Rachel held the envelope in her hands, the paper yellowed with age edges fragile like autumn leaves. She hesitated before sliding her finger under the flap, her breath uneven. Inside lay a folded letter and a small, leather-bound notebook, whose cover bore the marks of decades. She placed both carefully on the desk, the shepherd's ears twitching as if he too anticipated what they revealed. Lily leaned close, her voice hushed. "What does it say?" Mom, Rachel opened the notebook first. Its pages were filled with meticulous handwriting, neat columns and numbers, each entry accompanied by black and white photographs glued to the parchment. Her eyes moved across the lines, heart tightening, as she realized what she was reading. Each page cataloged a painting, a sculpture, or a piece of jewelry with notes about the original owners. Names, dates, countries. Rachel whispered them under her breath as she read, her throat dry. Hirschfeld family, Vienna, 1941. Removed during deportation. Rosenbaum, Paris, 1942. Confiscated from apartment. Page after page carried stories of loss disguised in inventory language. She saw the names of children, wives, husbands, their possessions ripped away in wartime chaos. Lily leaned closer, her eyes scanning the photographs of smiling faces now frozen in history. These belonged to people. Real people. She said, her voice trembling. Rachel's chest ached, her pulse heavy. She could almost hear the silence of those lives extinguished their joy, reduced to catalog entries. The hotel no longer felt like a sanctuary, but a tomb holding the weight of grief that had been hidden for decades. She flipped further, the entries running on for pages, until the ink grew shakier. The last written line trailed off as though the hand had faltered. Rachel set the notebook down gently, her fingers trembling as she reached for the letter. She unfolded it, the paper crackling. The words were written in elegant cursive, fading but still legible. "To whoever finds this," it began. Rachel's eyes darted across the page, her breath catching. "My name is Edward Harrington. Once I was a dealer, a broker, a coward. I was hired in 1946 to transport art stolen during the war. I told myself I was only a courier, that I bore no responsibility. But when I saw the faces behind these possessions, when I learned they belonged to families who never returned, I could not deliver them to men who sought only profit." Rachel's hands shook as she read further. "I hid them here. I sealed them in this place with machines to preserve them, knowing I could never return them myself. The men who owned me would have killed me for my betrayal. I disappeared, changed my name, left behind my fortune and my shame. For decades I lived with silence, but I could never silence the guilt. If you are reading this, then time has passed and I am gone. These treasures must be returned to those who still live, to the children and grandchildren of those whose names fill the ledger you hold. Do what I could not. Do not let cowardice define their memory. Rachel's throat tightened as tears burned her eyes. She sank into the velvet chair behind the desk, her hands clutching the letter. Lily's voice broke the silence, soft and unsteady. He wanted them to go back. Rachel nodded slowly, her voice cracking. Yes, he did. She looked down at the notebook again, the rows of names pressing into her like weights. Each line was not just an object, but a fragment of someone's stolen history. Her chest felt hollow as she imagined generations searching for something that had vanished, never knowing it was locked away here, above a crumbling hotel no one cared for. The shepherd rested his head on her lap, a quiet anchor in the storm unraveling inside her. Rachel stroked his fur absently, her eyes fixed on the letter. Harrington's words felt alive, whispering from beyond decades, pressing her toward a choice she wasn't ready to make. The room seemed smaller now, the air heavier, with the burden of secrets too large for her shoulders. She thought of Lily, her small hand resting on the desk beside the ledger, her innocence colliding with the dark truths of the past. Rachel's pulse throbbed in her ears. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "Why me, why now?" Her gaze drifted to the paintings glowing softly under the artificial light, their colors defiant against time. They were worth fortunes, yes, but they were also echoes of lives extinguished too soon. She imagined what just one canvas could mean: college tuition, a safe home, a future for Lily that didn't balance on desperation. Yet she also saw the hollow eyes of the families in the photographs, and her stomach twisted with guilt. Lily looked up at her eyes, wide and solemn. What are we going to do? Mom Rachel had no answer. She could only clutch the letter tighter. The words of a man long dead etched into her heart, demanding a response she wasn't sure she had the strength to give. Rachel stayed seated long after she finished Harrington's letter, her body heavy against the velvet chair, as though the weight of his confession had sunk into her bones. The German shepherd lay curled at her feet, his steady breathing the only sound in the penthouse that now felt too alive with ghosts. Lily had wandered towards the far wall, her small fingers tracing the edge of a gilded frame, her eyes wide as if she had stumbled into a dream. Rachel wanted to tell her to step away, to not touch anything, but her voice caught in her throat. She looked at the paintings again, her mind torn in two directions. Every instinct as a mother screamed at her that this was the answer to all her struggles. She could take one painting, just one, find a buyer. Discreetly, maybe a collector who asked no questions. That single canvas would pay for Lily's education, for a house where broken radiators didn't keep them shivering through winter, for food, without rationing every bite. She thought of the long nights she had counted coins under the harsh kitchen light, the humiliation of asking for extensions on overdue rent, the times she skipped meals so Lily wouldn't notice the fridge was nearly empty. Here in front of her lay salvation, silent and waiting. Nobody would ever know if one piece disappeared. But the ledger on the desk seemed to whisper otherwise. She reached for it again, flipping through its pages, the lists of names written with painstaking care. She saw a photograph of a girl no older than Lily, her hair tied back with a ribbon, her smile bright and unaware of the storm about to swallow her family. Beneath the picture was the name Elise Weiss, age 8, Berlin, 1942. Rachel's chest constricted. She closed the book quickly, unable to meet the child's eyes. Her thoughts churned. Would taking one painting mean stealing again, perpetuating the very theft Harrington had tried to undo? Or could she justify it as survival, as something necessary for Lily's future? Her stomach twisted with guilt, even as her desperation gnawed louder. She rubbed her temples, whispering, "God, what am I supposed to do?" She hadn't realized Lily had wandered back, until her daughter's voice startled her. "Mom, can I see that book?" Rachel froze, instinctively pulling the ledger closer to her chest. "No, sweetheart, it's not for you." But Lily, quick and curious, leaned in anyway, her eyes catching the open corner of a page. Before Rachel could stop her, she had read a few lines aloud, stumbling over foreign names. "Family Weiss. Taken during—" Her voice faltered as she looked up, confusion clouding her young face. "Mom, these things. They belonged to kids like me, didn't they? Kids who lost everything." Rachel felt her throat close. She looked into her daughter's eyes and saw innocence colliding with truth too sharp for her age. She wanted to deny it, to protect Lily from carrying the same heaviness pressing against her own chest. But the question hung in the air, unrelenting. Rachel's lips parted, but no words came. She could not lie, not to her child. Instead, she looked down at the ledger again, at the careful script that tethered each artifact to the memory of its stolen family. Lily's voice grew softer, tinged with sorrow. "If we keep them, isn't that like taking from those kids again?" Rachel blinked, hard tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She turned her face away so Lily wouldn't see the conflict twisting her features. In her mind, she saw both futures laid bare, one where she chose survival, where she took what she needed and secured safety for her daughter. Another where she honored the plea of a man long gone, and the memory of families erased, even if it meant continuing to scrape and struggle. The shepherd shifted against her legs, letting out a low whine, his head nudging her hand. It was as though he too demanded an answer, his loyalty bound not to her comfort but to some unspoken duty. Rachel leaned back, her body trembling. She whispered almost to herself, "I don't know if I can do this." Lily reached out, slipping her small hand into Rachel's, her touch steady, her eyes searching. "But you always tell me we do the right thing, Mom, even when it's hard." The words pierced deeper than any accusation could. Rachel's breath caught shame and love tangling inside her until she could barely breathe. She pulled her daughter close, burying her face in Lily's hair, holding her tightly as if clinging to the only truth she could trust. Her heart pounded with the realization that this choice was no longer about her alone. The ledger, the letter, the paintings, all of it had become a test of what kind of mother she was, of the kind of example she would leave her daughter. Yet still, the temptation clung to her like a shadow. The penthouse glittered with fortune untold, every piece, a whisper of wealth, security, freedom, and all it would take was silence. Rachel lay awake the entire night after Lily's question. Staring at the cracked ceiling of the manager's office, they had turned into a temporary bedroom. The German shepherd slept curled by the door, his chest rising and falling with slow certainty. But Rachel's heart refused to calm. She had tried to imagine a life where she could walk away from the ledger, a life where no one else ever knew what was hidden on the top floor. Yet Lily's words kept replaying in her mind, each one slicing deeper. Isn't that like taking from those kids again? The truth refused to be buried. By morning her decision was set, though fear wrapped tightly around it. She waited until Lily was at school, then sat at the old desk in the penthouse, her hands trembling as she dialed a number she had found online for the National Museum of Art. The line clicked, and a woman answered, brisk but polite. "This is Director's office. How may I help you?" Rachel swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. "My name is Rachel Miller. I think I've discovered something you've been searching for." At first, the silence stretched so long she thought they had hung up. Then the woman's tone shifted sharp and focused. "Can you explain?" Rachel hesitated, then described the ledger, the paintings, the sculptures, the letter she had found. She didn't dare mention numbers, didn't dare guess at value, only spoke of provenance, preservation, names written in ink. When she finished, the woman said only one sentence, "Stay where you are. We'll send someone immediately." Rachel set the phone down, her body numb. She had just lit a fuse she couldn't control. Within 24 hours, the quiet town of Harborview erupted. Black SUVs pulled up outside the old hotel. Men in dark suits stepping out with FBI badges flashing. Vans marked with museum logos arrived behind them, followed by unmarked vehicles with reporters spilling out cameras perched on their shoulders, microphones raised like weapons of truth. By the second day, satellite trucks lined the street, their dishes pointed toward the sky, feeding images of the crumbling hotel to millions of living rooms across the world. Rachel stood in the lobby, clutching Lily's hand, as officials streamed past her, their white gloves handling canvases with reverence, their voices clipped with professional urgency. The German shepherd paced anxiously, his nails clicking against marble floors, now polished by sudden activity. One agent approached her tall, stern-faced, introducing himself as Special Agent Carter. "Miss Miller, you understand the gravity of what you've uncovered, correct?" Rachel nodded, though her throat was dry. "I only did what seemed right." Carter studied her a moment, then gestured toward the penthouse, where experts cataloged each piece. "You may have just facilitated the largest art restitution case in modern history." The words stunned her. Largest. History. She had thought maybe millions enough to change lives, but not this. Not the scale unfolding before her. She overheard snippets of conversation as curators debated authenticity, as FBI agents confirmed provenance against Holocaust-era databases. Words like unprecedented, historic, and priceless filled the air, until Rachel felt dizzy. That night, as the town slept under the glow of floodlights set up around the hotel, a press conference gathered outside. Rachel stood off to the side, Lily perched on her hip, watching as the museum director, a composed woman named Dr. Evelyn Walsh, spoke into microphones. "We can confirm the collection discovered here in Harborview includes at least 70 paintings, 20 sculptures, and numerous artifacts stolen during World War II. The estimated value of this discovery exceeds $200 million. Cameras flashed, the crowd gasped, reporters shouted over one another. 200 million? Rachel's knees weakened the number so large it barely felt real. She tightened her grip on Lily, whispering, "We're safe. No matter what happens, we're safe now." But safety was not what she felt. She felt exposed, as though the entire world had turned its gaze on her, demanding to know why she had stumbled into this legacy. Strangers stopped her on the street, some applauding, others suspicious, their voices carrying words like hero, thief, opportunist. Rachel tried to ignore them, tried to focus on Lily, who looked at her with pride, unshaken by the noise. Yet at night, when the cameras left, and the hotel stood silent again, Rachel sat by the broken fireplace in the lobby, her hands shaking as she held Harrington's letter once more. She whispered into the shadows, "I hope I did the right thing." The shepherd lay nearby, lifting his head only to watch her, his eyes reflecting the faint glow of the streetlights outside. She wondered if even he understood the storm she had unleashed, a storm that was only beginning to rise. The chaos did not fade after the press conference. If anything, it only grew louder. Headlines spread like wildfire. Single mother discovers hidden war treasures. $200 million find in abandoned hotel, hero or thief. Rachel's name was everywhere, her face caught mid-step by paparazzi lenses each time she left the hotel. Reporters camped outside, day and night, their cameras pointed at the cracked windows of Harborview, as if waiting for the building itself to confess. At first, Rachel tried to ignore them, focusing on Lily's routine and the endless stream of officials cataloging the collection. But within a week, a new storm broke. One morning, Special Agent Carter handed her an envelope with a grim look. "You should read this," he said. Inside was a formal notice from a prestigious auction house, Harrington and Blythe, one of the world's largest. The words felt sharp. Even on the page, the company asserted that Rachel had no legal claim over the artifacts, that by housing them she was unlawfully possessing stolen property, and that all items must be turned over to the corporation for proper handling. Rachel's blood ran cold. She stared at the letter in disbelief, then looked up at Carter. "But these don't belong to them. They belong to families." Carter sighed. "You're right. But corporations like this, they thrive on technicalities. They're claiming the original Harrington estate signed over rights decades ago. It's messy." Rachel's chest tightened. She thought of Lily, of the fragile stability she had tried to build. Could this company really take everything away from the families who had already lost so much? The thought filled her with a sharp, protective anger. She refused to be complicit in another theft. By the next day, the lawsuit was public. News anchors debated whether Rachel was a well-meaning discoverer or an opportunist hiding behind sympathy. Some commentators accused her of staging the find of seeking money or fame. The weight of suspicion pressed heavily on her each word, like another stone piled on her back. She avoided looking at the cameras, but she couldn't avoid Lily's questions. "Mom, are they going to take it all away?" the girl whispered one night. Rachel pulled her daughter close, forcing confidence into her voice. "No, baby. Not if we keep telling the truth." Yet, truth alone did not feel like enough. Then, just as the tide seemed impossible to fight, something unexpected happened. At a town hall meeting organized hastily to address the growing media circus, the room packed with reporters and locals, a frail, elderly man rose slowly from the back row. He leaned heavily on a cane, his face lined with age, but his voice carried with surprising strength. "My name is Samuel Weiss," he said, and a hush fell over the room. "I am the grandson of Elise Weiss, whose picture appears in that ledger." Rachel's breath caught. She remembered the child's photograph, the ribbon in her hair, the entry that had haunted her. Samuel's hands shook as he held up a faded photo of a young girl at a piano. "That was my aunt. She never came back, but one of those paintings, Rachel found it. It hung in her parents' home before it was stolen, and now, after 70 years, we will see it again." The crowd stirred emotion rippling through their whispers. Samuel turned his eyes, fixing on Rachel. "You have done what no one else dared. You honored families like mine when others wanted profit. For that we thank you." The room erupted in applause, the sound crashing against the walls with force. Cameras snapped, microphones shoved forward, but the narrative had shifted. Samuel's testimony cut through the corporate arguments like a blade. The public no longer saw Rachel as a thief. They saw her as a woman standing against greed, aligned with victims whose voices had been silenced for too long. That night, Rachel sat by the lobby's broken fireplace. Lily nestled beside her, the shepherd's head resting on her lap. She felt the exhaustion of weeks pressing down, but for the first time she also felt something else, a spark of hope. Samuel's words had carried weight, a weight stronger than contracts and lawsuits. People had listened, and for once the tide seemed to be turning. Still, Rachel knew this was far from over. Harrington and Blythe was not a company that surrendered easily. The storm ahead might be fiercer than anything she had yet faced, and deep down she feared what they might do next to protect their claim. The lawsuit had brought weeks of endless tension, and Rachel often felt she was walking a tightrope above a crowd ready to cheer or jeer with every move she made. Yet amid the chaos, one detail kept nagging at her, the German shepherd who had led her to the hidden stairwell in the first place. The dog had stayed by her side since that day, protective and strangely attuned, never wandering far, as though bound to her by invisible threads. During a routine day when FBI agents cataloged yet another set of canvases, one of the animal control officers present noticed the shepherd and frowned. "That dog looks trained," he said, crouching slightly to study the animal. "Have you had him scanned for a microchip?" Rachel blinked, realizing she had never thought to check. The officer returned the next day with a handheld scanner. The shepherd stood still as the device beeped faintly near his shoulder. The officer's brows lifted. "He's chipped. Let's see who he belonged to." Minutes later, Rachel was handed a printed record. The name on the paper made her chest tighten. Daniel Harrington. She read the details again, stunned. Daniel Harrington, local art collector, deceased 3 years ago. Related by blood to Edward Harrington, the very man whose letter had set this storm into motion. Rachel sat heavily on a chair, the paper trembling in her hand. The shepherd lowered himself at her feet, pressing his head gently against her knee, as if confirming what she now knew. Lily looked up at her mother, eyes wide. "Mom, he belonged to them all along." Rachel nodded slowly. To the family, to the people who hid all this. It wasn't just coincidence that the dog had found them, led them to the sealed stairwell, barked until she broke the chains. He had been waiting, guarding, holding a secret that outlived his master. The revelation spread quickly through the agents and curators, fueling another round of press frenzy. Reporters latched onto the story of the faithful shepherd headlines, proclaiming, "The watchdog of history, Harrington's silent guardian. The dog who kept the secret." Yet the most startling discovery came days later when a lawyer arrived from the county courthouse carrying a sealed file. This was part of Daniel Harrington's estate. The lawyer explained, his voice formal. It was only recently unsealed because of the renewed investigation. "You should hear this." Inside the file was a copy of Daniel's will, written years before his death. Rachel's eyes scanned the text, her breath catching. "To whoever uncovers the collection preserved in Harborview Hotel, I ask that you honor my Uncle Edward's intent. Return the pieces to their rightful families. Do not sell, do not profit, do not hide. Let justice finally arrive, even if I could not deliver it myself. My dog Max has been trained to remain near the property. He will guide you. Trust him." Rachel's hands trembled as she read the words aloud to Lily and the small circle of officials present. The room fell silent, the significance pressing down like a weight. This wasn't just a discovery anymore. It was a mission entrusted across generations. Lily whispered softly, almost reverently, "He was waiting for us." Rachel pressed her lips together, emotions colliding: relief, sorrow, responsibility. She reached down to stroke Max's fur, her voice unsteady. "You've been guarding this all this time, haven't you, boy?" The shepherd's tail thumped softly against the marble floor, his amber eyes lifting to hers with a calm that felt almost knowing. News of the will and the shepherd's role spread even faster than the lawsuit. Suddenly, Rachel was no longer portrayed merely as a struggling single mother caught in a storm, but as the person chosen by chance, by fate, or by the loyalty of a dog to carry out the Harrington family's final request. Crowds outside the hotel grew larger, many holding signs of support. "Thank you, Rachel," some read. Others carried messages like "Justice for families" and "Let the art go home." The auction house, once confident in its claim, now faced an overwhelming tide of public opinion shifting against them. Commentators on evening news panels spoke less about contracts and more about morality, about a dog's loyalty outlasting human greed. Rachel, sitting in the lobby with Lily curled against her side and Max at her feet, felt the momentum turning. For the first time since the discovery, she wasn't only reacting to forces bigger than her, she felt as though something or someone had chosen her for this fight. But even as hope stirred, Rachel knew the battle wasn't finished. If anything, the stakes had grown higher. With Max's history revealed, and Daniel Harrington's will now public, the world's eyes were sharper, hungrier, demanding to see whether she would follow through on the promise written decades ago. The legal battle stretched on for months, but the turning point had already arrived the day Daniel Harrington's will surfaced, and Max's identity was revealed. With the weight of his testimony combined with Edward Harrington's confession letter and the relentless pressure of public opinion, the lawsuit from Harrington and Blythe crumbled. International restitution laws, written specifically to protect looted art, shielded Rachel from any liability. Instead of being prosecuted, she was recognized as a facilitator of justice. The relief she felt the morning the final ruling was handed down was indescribable. She sat on the courthouse steps with Lily beside her, Max's head resting heavily on her lap when the news broke. "Miss Miller, an attorney from the museum, said with a smile, 'You've not only done the right thing, but you've secured protection. You will not walk away empty-handed. There are provisions for finders like you.' The families, the museums, even international cultural organizations have agreed on something extraordinary." Rachel frowned, uncertain. "I didn't do this for money." The attorney nodded. "And that is exactly why they want to give it to you. Think of it as a thank you, a recognition." A few weeks later, she stood in the Penthouse once more, now bustling with experts packing crates. Officials handed her a folder detailing the outcome, a finder's reward donations from grateful heirs, and a grant from the Holocaust Memorial Foundation. The total amount left her dizzy, not because it promised wealth beyond dreams, but because it meant something she never thought possible enough to restore Harborview, enough to turn the place she had once bought in desperation into something bigger than herself. She held the folder tightly, tears slipping down her cheeks. For once she did not cry from fear. Mom, Lily whispered beside her, "Does this mean we can really fix it?" Rachel pulled her daughter close, nodding. "Yes, sweetheart, we can fix it. For good." The work began almost immediately. Scaffolding rose against the old stone walls, crews filled the halls, the sound of hammers and saws ringing through rooms that had once been silent with decay. Local contractors donated time, neighbors brought supplies, strangers mailed contributions. Harborview became more than a restoration project. It became a movement, a symbol of resilience for a community that had long felt forgotten. Through it all, Max never left Rachel's side. He patrolled the site with a quiet dignity, his presence grounding the chaos, his amber eyes following every step, as if ensuring the mission remained true. Reporters continued to arrive, but now their stories carried a different tone. They called Rachel a reluctant hero, a guardian of memory, a woman who turned down temptation in favor of truth. She always answered the same way when asked about her motives. "I did it because my daughter reminded me what was right," she would say, glancing at Lily. "And because history deserves justice." 18 months after the discovery, the grand reopening of Harborview finally arrived. The stone facade gleamed under the late autumn sun. Windows restored the once crumbling entrance, now framed with flowers and banners. The ground floor bustled with life, a daycare center where children played, a kitchen where neighbors cooked together, classrooms where volunteers tutored kids after school. The upper floors housed families who once faced eviction notices or slept in cars, now given safe apartments with doors that locked, heaters that worked, and walls that no longer crumbled. And at the very top, where chains had once sealed secrets in silence, the penthouse had been transformed into a small museum. Its walls now bore photographs of the families who had reclaimed their art displays, telling their stories, and panels explaining the journey of the collection. A corner was dedicated to Edward Harrington, whose act of cowardice had turned into redemption, and to Daniel Harrington, whose will ensured his uncle's legacy would not be forgotten. Visitors streamed in from across the country to witness not only the art itself, but the story of its return. Rachel stood in the center of the lobby that day, Lily dressed in her best clothes, Max sitting proudly by their side. The mayor gave a speech, the museum director praised Rachel's courage, and Samuel Weiss himself stood at the podium, his cane shaking as he raised a hand. "For decades my family thought our history was lost. Today we walk through a door we never believed would open, and we thank Miss Miller for holding it wide for all of us." Applause thundered through the hall, chandeliers trembling from the sound. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, her heart swelling with a gratitude she could hardly contain. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped up slowly, Lily's hand clasped in hers, Max at her heel. She took a breath and faced the crowd. "When I bought this building, I thought I was buying a roof, a place to keep my daughter safe. I had no idea what it really held. But I've learned something since then. Buildings aren't just walls. They hold stories. And when those stories come with pain, we have to choose, do we bury them, or do we bring them into the light?" Her voice wavered, but grew stronger. "I didn't find treasure. I found responsibility, and I couldn't carry it alone. But thanks to my daughter, to a loyal dog, to a community that chose to fight for justice, we've built something better than money could ever buy. We've built hope." The applause rose again, deafening, but Rachel hardly heard it. She was looking at Lily, whose smile lit the hall brighter than any chandelier. Max barked once, sharp and proud, and the sound carried through the building like a seal of approval. From that day forward, Harborview was no longer a ruin, no longer a secret. It became a beacon of what could happen when courage outweighed greed, when truth defeated silence. And Max, once a lonely guardian of hidden history, now stood as the hotel's living symbol, loved by children, admired by visitors, a reminder that loyalty can endure decades, and that justice sometimes arrives on 4 legs. If this story moved, you take a moment to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What moment surprised you the most, and what would you have done if you were in Rachel's place? And tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment below, and let's keep the conversation going.